What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got 18 tips and tricks for some of you beginners out there and Helldivers too, and some of you veterans may get a benefit from some of these at the same time, considering we have basically completely changed the game from the first one. Being that now we're in that third-person mode, it definitely carries the torch with a much brighter flame, and arguably, Liberty has never shined so bright as it does in this game. For democracy. But that being said, let's jump straight into the list. Starting off with tip number 1, obviously one of those things that we need to address, the elephant in the room, that friendly fire is always on. Some of you newcomers may not understand this, and trust me, you are going to learn fairly quickly if you have not already. Anything that you drop down can not only kill you, but all of your teammates. Everything in this game that possibly is a payload, a turret, anything that you could possibly imagine might be friendly to you is probably going to end up ending you at some point. Even your own turret can do a 180 and completely eviscerate you. I've had it happen myself, and trust me, it's going to happen to you. Don't worry, it's coming, but at least you'll be able to dive back in straight after that. But that is something that we needed to address at the very beginning, as it's going to be something that's going to happen time and time again, and it may be something we reference back to a little bit later in some of these other tips and tricks. So let's just come out the gate swinging with the most apparent thing. Do your best to avoid shooting people in front of you. Running in front of other people shooting, and running in front of anything else that may be shooting in your general direction, as every turret is always going to get its job done, whether or not it's going through you or going through one of your teammates. So be very careful and be mindful of any markers that might be next to you that look red, because guess what? You've got ordnance coming straight down on top of you. Tip number 2 is know your stratagems. These are effectively what are going to make or break the team for pushing into harder difficulties or just pushing from mission to mission. There's going to be a variety of different stratagems you can use to get heavy weapons, to get turrets, to have payloads drop, to be able to just eviscerate enemies or create defenses. The big thing is you need to take the time to read over some of these stratagems and get your strategy straight before coming into certain missions, as sometimes you will need to be able to have a holdout moment. Other ones you need to be efficient and quick at taking out some of these terminate holes, which I will highly suggest the Eagle airstrike, considering it's one of the few where you can just drop that little airdrop right in the middle of some of those terminate holes, and it's going to close them right up with the quickness. It's a perfect little one, and we'll be having a video coming out later on for top 5 early game stratagems, so be sure to hit that subscribe button to see some more of this content. And be well informed when it comes to Helldivers too. But continuing on with know your stratagems, you also need to understand how they function. You need to know where to place them, and basically give you the best bet as to whether or not getting yourself killed or getting your team killed can be a possibility within the mix of that, as there's more than a few of those orbital drops and some of those airdrops that can completely eviscerate your team in just one fell swoop. You included, if you don't know how close you are, and some of them have quite a wide radius of effect, or area of effect, as I should say. And one more small tip to add in with the know your stratagems is with the Eagle aircraft. If you have multiple of the stratagem of the Eagle aircraft with different types of abilities coming from that Eagle aircraft, you will need to use all of them for it to go back to rearm. So say I have 3 of the Eagle's airstrike and 3 of the carpet bombing. If I use up all 3 of the airstrike and then I have the 3 left of just the carpet bombing, well, guess what? The airstrike's not going on cooldown. I'm going to have to use up all 3 of those carpet bomb for it to rearm itself. So what you'll need to do is look in your stratagems, and you'll notice there is one that you can now type in that is going to be rearming the Eagle. It's forcing it to go back to your ship and rearm itself. This is something that'll pop up while you're in the game after you've utilized some of the stratagems for the Eagle aircraft, and by that point, you know, it'll be on the left hand side. It'll be a part of the different multiple combinations that you can put in. More than likely it'll be just under whatever the resupply stratagem is. You'll notice it as a yellow icon on the top left, and then as soon as you put that in, it'll immediately go back into your ship and then be able to rearm itself. So I thought I'd throw that into the know your stratagem, as it's one of the few things that works in combination as compared to the rest of the stratagems, where you can have any multitude of them and each one of them is going to have their own separate cooldown, but it does not have the same effect when it comes to the Eagle stratagem. So a little bit of a tip within a tip. Tip number 3 is stop being the chronic reloader, as within this game, every single time that you hit reload, you completely jettison that magazine. Whether or not you only shot 2 rounds or you depleted the entire thing, one of the best rule of thumbs is to just wait until your character says, I'm out. And at that point, hit the reload button, which I wish in this game there was a capable way of automatically reloading as soon as I've actually depleted that magazine, but we can't always have every pleasantry we'd like to have in each one of these games. But that being said, at the same time, is nothing worse than dropping half of the magazine of a machine gun or a grenade launcher and accidentally just ripping that, as you already get so few of the magazines for those. But don't worry, you will be able to refill those magazines with the ammo boxes or the resupply boxes that you can drop in from a stratagem anytime that you'd like. So don't fear if you're on one of those moments where you have that cooldown or you've wasted some of that. You can refill it as you go along. The only thing that you can't refill is the anti-tank expendable one. Every other one of those heavy weapons that you can drop in for yourself, you can resupply the ammo for. But moving on to tip number 4, which is use the resupply stratagem all the time. There is nothing more beneficial for you and your team than each time that you're basically moving from objective to objective or possibly getting to some of those side objectives. If you have that already on cooldown, you might as well throw it. It's an unlimited supply. It's a short cooldown, and in between movements from each one of these locations, it should be back up and ready to go. And there's nothing more beneficial than you and your team than having everything that you could possibly need available on hand, considering it's going to refill 2 of your grenades, 2 of your stems, and completely refill all of your magazines for every weapon that you have. There's nothing better than having that directly on hand, and it's just going to make it a whole lot more of an efficient movement through each one of these missions if you have this every time that you move from objective to objective. And since it is unlimited, just keep throwing that out there and keep yourselves fully stocked. Tip number 5 is using stealth. This is actually something that I know a lot of people may not understand, as there is going to be roving caravans of these bugs you'll see as you're traveling from objective to objective, and at certain moments, if they're getting close, you can actually just drop to the ground and start crawling on the ground. As if one of them does see you, this is one of those moments where, especially in harder difficulties, you can end up having a swarm on you pretty quickly, as there'll be a bug breach in those moments where possibly one of those ticks or any of the other bugs could possibly alert the rest of the bugs that there's an enemy here and they need backup. And in those moments, especially when it comes to higher difficulties, that can basically eat up a good bit of time. So if you're looking to be somebody that's a bit more efficient, trying to get through there timely, and just trying to conserve on the possibility of survivability at that same point, it can be one of those moments where you may just need to crouch or possibly dive to the ground, let them pass, or possibly try to crawl past and get to a position where you're out of that line of sight and then keep moving towards your next objective. It can save on ammunition, it can save on lives, and it can save on time, and further increase your overall XP gain by the end of that match. Tip number 6 is utilizing the gray circle as the spot to shoot. As you may have noticed, when it comes to the third person's perspective, even while aiming down sight, you may be utilizing that little white dot as the point of location for your crosshairs. But the reality is the little gray circle that moves around with that white dot is actually where your barrel is pointed and where your bullets are going to land. And maybe you've noticed that this gray circle goes off into a different completely direction every time you're on a full auto weapon, and that is actually where you're going to be able to utilize that thing to its fullest, as there are so many different games that do not give you this the capability of basically seeing exactly where your recoil pattern is going, where your shots are going to land, and giving you the exact location of it. It is a beautiful feature within this game, and I utilize it to its fullest, and trust me, once you start seeing that and you start understanding to utilize that little gray circle, you're going to be a dead shot in no time, and it's going to help a ton when it comes to hitting those weak spots and some of those headshots on certain enemies, just to finish them off a whole lot quicker and save on ammunition and possibly stems. Tip number 7 is keep an eye out for samples and make sure that you always collect them after you die. One of the biggest problems that you may find yourself in is one of these little upgrade nodes that you will be able to gather up each time that you go into a mission. They will be obscurely scattered all across the map in multitude of different locations, and it'll look like a little white pill, or at least 2 halves of a circle with a little line down the middle of it. And effectively, Each time that you pick these up, you will have it on stock, but the number one thing on how to lose that is if you end up dying, it will drop to the ground, and if you do not go back to pick it up, you will lose it. And there are only so many of these on each one of the missions that you actually run. It's not the most scarce resource, but having it can be a huge help for you, as this is going to be one of the number one resources you'll need in order to upgrade every capable stratagem you have, and it'll give you the capability of getting some of those out faster and pushing into harder difficulties, giving you all of the edges you may possibly need when it comes to pushing into the end game of Helldivers 2. So getting them early is a big must, and having them is going to be a huge benefit to you. You will notice it fairly quickly, but you will also need a lot of them, and that's why I have to make this statement as clear as possible. You want to go after them, you want to find them as much as you possibly can, and you want to hold on to them, because you will need to have them by the end of the mission and extract with them in order to get them out. And there's nothing worse than having that moment when you possibly got 5 to 6 of them on you, and then next thing you know, well, I died and I forgot to go grab them. I've had a couple of moments like that, and trust me, it's cost me a bit more time when it comes to upgrading my ship's modules. But hopefully, you will not have the same issues. Tip number 8 is taking down the Spore Fog. You may have noticed in certain missions that you've come into, there is a massive amount of fog that looks like a bunch of spores, similar to that of The Last of Us, actually, is basically one of the best ways to put it. It seems like it's covering the entire land, and it's giving a lot of coverage for some of those enemies within it at the same time, which gives you a lot less visibility, and who knows, you may be ending up running up on some enemies before you even know it, or before you even see them. The number one thing about this is, if you do end up seeing this, it's almost a gimme for a good bit of XP and a good bit of currency on top of that, as there is going to be a giant mushroom tree somewhere nearby within the vicinity of that Spore Fog that is basically putting all that Spore Fog out for you. And it's well worth it to take it out, as it's going to completely clear up the entire area. In some instances, it can be extremely annoying basically having the lowest portion of visibility, so after you've got it cleared up, it's going to be a night and day difference between you and taking out some of these enemies. One of the best ways to spot them is to generally, as soon as you find yourself within this Spore Fog, get to some type of high ground, look around. It's going to be a very tall spore mushroom tree, and you'll be able to see it in no time. And the best thing about it is it's extremely easy to take this down. If you've got a grenade launcher, it takes about 2 rounds. If you got a couple of grenades, just toss them over there. It's basically going to fall over pretty quickly. I'm not sure whether or not you can shoot it with regular guns that have it topple over, but it's worth a try, and more than likely, if anything, it may just take 1 magazine to topple it over. By that point, you're in clear skies, seeing all the vicinities around you. Tip number 9 is exact the revenge on those that have dropped you, or effectively anything that may have killed you. When it comes to redeploying, you can drop yourself on top of any one of those bugs and pretty much instantly kill them. Now, aside from a Charger or a Bile Titan, which may not basically get full death from it, unless you've just got pinpoint accuracy, which isn't always going to be the case. But it sometimes can be a useful strategy if you've already been dead and you've been called back in to try and take out some of those heavier enemies by dropping straight on top of them. And in any other case, you may just get revenge on whatever smaller creature that may have got you. Drop right on their head, squish them, and keep on trooping. Tip number 10 is all about taking down the Charger as efficiently as possible. Now, one of the best ways to take down a Charger is obviously taking some type of Eagle airstrike or ordnance from orbital and just blowing them to bits. But say you end up getting on cooldown, or possibly you drop down one of those ordnance and it doesn't quite hit the mark. Well, you've got 2 options beyond that point. Well, 3 options technically, but the third option of just trying to keep shooting him in the rear in that one weak spot that we know he has with our regular guns is not exactly the most efficient route. And trying to toss grenades at him, especially if you don't have any impact grenade, is going to be a bit troublesome, and it's going to take quite a few of them to get it done. Your best option beyond that point is either using a grenade launcher and shooting him in the rear, or using an expendable anti-tank rocket or recoilless rifle in order to blow a hole in the side of him. A lot of people may not fully know that this is a method to taking him down, as they may be utilizing those rockets and trying to just hit them in the rear weak spot, when in fact they could be making a more efficient route to taking him down by shooting him directly in the side. This will blow a hole in the side of him, exposing his innards and making a massive weak spot for you and your team to shoot him with regular ammunition and take him down a whole lot faster. Or possibly having a really cool Rico moment where you can just get on top of that bug, throw a grenade into that hole just like that flame-spitting bug from Starship Troopers, and blow that thing sky high with one good grenade. There's nothing better than that moment, and I wish I had a clip for it. One day, I will. Moving on to tip number 11. Look out for landmines pretty much everywhere you go. It is a very chaotic world out there, depending on which planet you're on, especially if you're on the automaton planets. They have the most deadly of the landmines, and it will blow you sky high. And trust me when I say it's got a nice little blast radius, so if you got a buddy right next to you, well, they're going down straight with you. Or, should I say, going flying up with you. And that dive that you take right after that is not the same one every Helldiver dreams of when he's dropping onto the planet. This one is a cold, dark fate that you don't want to end up in. Which gets even worse when you're on the bug planets, considering these landmines may not be the most deadly, but they will damage you and they will slow you, so they will leave you prey to any bug within the vicinity that will consume you quite quickly. It's a fascinating fact that nature is a very, very fickle, well, let's just say, words can't be said on YouTube, sadly enough. But do keep an eye out for anything that's blue, yellow, or red and spiky on the ground everywhere that you go. It could be the end of you right then and there. Tip number 12 is dive like it's no tomorrow. You need to utilize the diving mechanic in this game in order to survive pretty much so many different instances. I mean, I have probably a plethora of clips that I could probably showcase in front of you right now where there are so many moments where I've dove forward, I've dove left, I've dove right, I've dove backwards. Any which direction you'd like to dive, it can be beneficial for you. But do be careful if you're at a very high location and decide to dive, because you will still take fall damage, and yes, you can break your legs, arms, head, chest, everything above. It can be a destructive dive, but one of the most important times to dive is definitely when you see that turret in front of you and next thing you know it starts swiveling towards you. Buddy, you better get to ducking real quick. Dive to the ground with the quickness. Tip number 13 is look over all the armor you have available to you at the kiosk on side of your Mother of Supremacy, or whatever the name of your ship is, considering, you know, I ride with best style on my Mother of Supremacy. SES. Super Earth's finest. Well, but what I mean by look at what armor you have is every bit of the chest armor has some type of attribute that may be attributed to it, and at the same point, some will have less armor and more mobility. So depending on your playstyle, you may want to have a look over what you have available to you or what you're currently wearing and decide whether or not there may be something better for your playstyle. Tip number 14 is all about a couple of secrets you may not have noticed or you may have just looked over in certain instances. All across every single map that you go to, beyond some of those maps that may be a bit smaller and a bit of a holdout position, you will find miscellaneous objectives all across there, remnants of what Super Earth colonists have been either building or basically saving for dark times and good times. At that same point, there are super credits all over the place. There are some of those samples to be found, and there's two instances that you may have overlooked. There are some hangar bay doors with two buttons where you need to hit those buttons in unison, but you do not have to hold them. There are, you know, I've definitely sat there and held the button with somebody else thinking that we had to hold the button to open the door all the way. No, as soon as both lights are green, you can just walk right in. But at the same time, there are also shipping containers that are buried underground, and you can see the doorways in some type of trench that you may find out and about in some of these miscellaneous spots. Throw a grenade at, blow open that door, and you find yourselves treasures beyond glory. Now, sometimes it may be something of a heavy weapon that you may not have used before, but at the same point, the most valuable thing that can come out of this is either super credits, war bonds, or some more of those samples. Nothing can be better than finding every bit of the crafting and currency material you need to make your Super Earth ship better than the rest. Tip number 15 is all about taking down those bloaty little ants. Well, I don't exactly know what to call them, but they like to vomit, and for whatever reason, their vomit seems to be one of the most deadly things in this game. I can't believe it. You better be diving left or right or running left and right when that thing starts to puke up, because that pregnant little ant, whew, man, they've got some morning sickness you don't want to have to deal with. Now, that being said, probably one of the quickest ways to take down one of these bloaty little bugs is to shoot them in the face. You may have thought to yourself, you know what, look at that big, round back end back there, I need to blow that out. Well, it turns out you may be blowing that out with a lot more rounds than you possibly imagined, and shooting them in the face takes a whole lot less rounds and can be done a whole lot quicker. You could end up either saving your own life or some of those of your team a lot faster by aiming for that mouth and blowing it right out. Tip number 16 is all about your stamina. Look down at the bottom of your screen, realize that every time you go to sprint, you start to deplete that little white bar, and then by the end of that timer right there that just closes down with that little white bar, you will be exhausted. Now, for whatever reason, you don't stop running. You effectively turn into a jog, which is a little bit quicker than walking, but you will move a whole lot faster if you decide to stop sprinting, go back to walk, and then let it regain. And in certain instances, this can be life-saving, considering if you decide to get into some combat and then next thing you know, you go back to walking after your ADS, well, not having a full stamina bar is going to be a real problem in instances where you may need to start dodging and then rolling and running. It's going to be a problematic experience, so do keep in mind that you need to make sure you're constantly at a full stamina bar, or at least utilizing the stamina to the best of its ability. Efficiency is one thing that can cost you experience at the end of the day. And credits. Don't forget the credits. Tip number 17 is all about reminding yourself that Anakin didn't have the high ground and he still lost, but the only reason he survived was because he was prophetic, or whatever. He was part of a prophecy. You, Helldiver, are part of a prophecy, but you may be prophesized to just be some paste on the ground. So that being said, you need to maintain the high ground, just like old Obi-Wan Kenobi, to ensure that you're not that paste on the ground and you're not just some name on a wall somewhere that people don't remember. Because who knows if you even made it onto that wall, buddy. Trust me, you're going to need to have the superiority out there when it comes to fighting these bugs or those automatons, and you need a clear visual line of sight to drop in those stratagems and put your strategy to the best of its fullest ability. And rounding it out at tip number 18, don't be afraid to push into harder difficulties. You may be sitting there thinking to yourself, I'm at medium and that's challenging enough for me. I'm at challenging and that's actually challenging. I'm at hard and oh man, this is hard. And then you look at extreme and you think to yourself, I don't know if I'm extreme. Well, buddy, lock it in. You've been extreme. You're ready for suicide mission. You're ready for the impossible. And you're ready to be a Helldiver. Don't wait to push into harder difficulties. Give yourself enough time to get yourselves strapped with a good bit of those stratagems and maybe a few ship modules, but trust me, you're going to be blowing through those stratagems, you're going to be racking up those credits, and you're going to get a ton of samples, including the better samples you need to get better ship modules. You don't want to miss out on that XP gain. You don't want to miss out on the better experiences you will have by pushing into harder difficulties. If you keep playing the same difficulty, it's going to get monotonous. It's going to get boring. You'll have less of those moments of variety that may be thrown in. There's going to be a whole lot less of the enemies. What's going to happen when you end up just starting to use a payload and it just doesn't feel the same way that it used to when you started blowing them to bits? 5 enemies? Or do you want to blow up 50 enemies with one payload and watch all that carnage in front of you? You want to be painted in the blood of your enemies. Enlist now, super citizen. But people, that's going to wrap it up right there. That's going to be the end of the tips and tricks video right there. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully this has helped you out quite a bit. And if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description. Follow me over at Twitch. We're going to be streaming this for a good while here in the coming future. We'll be up there every single day as well. I have more than a few videos that are coming out in the future, so if you'd like to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more coming, and we've got a lot to do when it comes to stratagems, combinations of stratagems. You know, let me know down in the comments if you have any recommendations for some type of content you'd like to see from this, whether or not it just be some raw gameplay with me trying to make some of the best loadouts I can possibly imagine, or just going into some of those harder difficulties, giving it a little bit of a rundown, maybe even some solo runs at the much harder difficulties. Who knows, I may play around with it, but at the same time, this is one of those games that you really can't miss out on that 4-player co-op. It's such a sweet quality experience. Honestly, it's going to be probably one of the best co-op games of the year. I know we have a few things coming out in the future that will be pretty nice additions for the rest of the year, but more than likely this is really going to be one of those cherry on top ones that you're going to see a lot of people consistently come back to, especially as they update it through the coming years. Hopefully they continue to make expansions for this or just continue to keep adding to it. I really hope that is going to be the case, but overall, I hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, and I'll see you out there, Helldivers. Have a good one.